Number 1. Iku-Turso. Imagine a sea god you could grab, threaten, and command, yet never truly kill. That is where we begin, in the freezing waters of the far north, with a monster that almost no one outside Finland has ever heard of. Iku-Turso is a malevolent sea creature drawn from Finnish and Karelian mythology. His name is often translated as the Eternal Turso, or the Ancient Turso, because the word Iku means eternal or aged. He comes to us through the Kalevala, the national epic of Finland, which was compiled by a country doctor named Elias Lönnrot. The first version appeared in 1835, and an expanded edition followed in 1849. Lönnrot did not invent these stories. He traveled through rural Karelia and wrote down ancient runic songs sung by village singers, including a famous bard named Arhipa Pertunen, whose memory preserved a whole pre-Christian world. In the songs, Iku-Turso is given a chilling epithet, Tuhatpea, which means thousand-headed or thousand-horned. Later artists seized on that image and gave him a forest of horns rising from the black water. The roots of his name connect to Tursas, an old word for a monstrous sea being, and some scholars even tie it to the Old Norse Thurs, meaning a giant or a troll. In one of the most striking passages, the witch queen Louhi of the northern land of Pohjola summons Iku-Turso from the depths to stop the heroes who are stealing a magical object called the Sampo. The hero Vainamoinen seizes the monster by the ears, demands to know why he rose from the sea, and then releases him with a command never to surface again. What did this creature actually look like? The honest answer is that no one agreed. In some tellings he is tentacled, like an octopus. In others he is closer to a walrus or a dragon. That uncertainty is exactly why he fascinates us. Folklorists like Martti Havio and Anna-Leena Sikala read him as a blend of sea monster, war god, and underworld spirit. In certain songs he even brings disease, sending sickness ashore from the waves. There is no carcass here, no sighting tradition, only an image. But ask yourself why the coldest, least explored seas on Earth produced the idea of an eternal, horned intelligence that could be bound, but never destroyed. Because the next creature on our list did leave something behind, a body. Number 2. The Con Rit. In the year 1883, something washed ashore in what is now Ha Long Bay, in the Gulf of Tonkin, in Vietnam. Local people called it the Con Rit, which means the centipede of the sea. The name uses con, a Vietnamese word placed before animals, and rit, meaning centipede, because the body was described as long, dark, and divided into hard segments, like a colossal insect. This was not a vague shape in the fog. According to the accounts, it was a physical corpse, roughly 60 feet long and about 3 feet wide, lying on the sand where dozens of people could see it. The most cited investigation came later, associated with Dr. A. Krempf, the director of the Oceanographic and Fisheries Service of French Indochina, who gathered testimony about the find. Witnesses said the body was armored with paired appendages or filaments running along each side, which only deepened the centipede comparison. They also described an overpowering stench. And here's the frustrating part of the story. Before any scientist could properly examine it, the villagers towed the rotting carcass back out to sea to be rid of the smell. No bone, no preserved piece, and no photograph is known to survive. The cryptozoologist Bernard Heuvelmans made the Con Rit famous in the wider world through his 1968 book In the Wake of the Sea Serpents. He placed it in a category he called the many-finned sea serpent, and argued it might be a large unknown armored animal. Skeptics offer calmer explanations. A decomposing whale, a basking shark, or a giant oarfish can all be misread once decay sets in. The oarfish in particular, which can grow beyond 8 meters, is blamed for serpent reports all over the planet. And there is a known trick of decomposition. As a large animal rots, blocks of muscle called myomeres separate, creating the false impression of body segments and joints. So is the Con Rit a real unknown creature, or a familiar animal transformed by rot and rumor? We cannot test it because the evidence floated away on the tide. What makes it stand apart from almost every other sea monster is its body plan. It was not a serpent or a whale shape. It was built like an arthropod, like something that should crawl, not swim. Hold that image because our next creature was worshipped as a god. Number 3. Akkorokamui. Off the coast of Hokkaido, the northern island of Japan, the indigenous Ainu people told of a monster so large it could turn the sky red. This is Akkorokamui, and the second half of its name, Kamui, means a god or a divine spirit. The name is often read as the string-holding Kamui, an image of long arms trailing through the water like cords. Its traditional home is Uchiura Bay, also called Funka Bay, a deep volcanic caldera bay on Hokkaido's southern coast. The descriptions are staggering. Akkorokamui is said to stretch more than 110 meters and to glow a vivid burning red so intensely that its reflection stains both the sea and the sky above it. It was said to swallow boats and even whales whole. Ainu tradition gives it a trait that is genuinely true of real octopuses. It can tear off its own limbs to escape and then regrow them. Because of this, Akkorokamui was also believed to have healing powers, especially for injuries and diseases of the limbs and skin. So, it was feared and respected at the same time, both a devourer and a possible cure. The missionary and folklorist John Batchelor, who lived among the Ainu in the late 1800s and early 1900s, recorded these accounts. He noted that fishermen carried scythes and sickles, ready to cut at the grasping arms if the creature ever rose beneath their boats. Where does a story like this come from? The waters around Japan are home to the giant Pacific octopus, scientific name Enteroctopus doflini, the largest octopus species on Earth, which can span several meters across. Giant squid of the genus Architeuthis also drift through these seas and occasionally strand. A large red cephalopod surfacing in a misty bay, seen by frightened fishermen, is exactly the kind of encounter that grows in the retelling. Uchiura Bay is deep and rich with life, the perfect stage. Akkorokamui has now traveled far beyond Hokkaido, appearing in video games, in anime, and in modern internet horror fiction, which keeps the name alive for millions who have never heard of the Ainu. The most haunting detail is the idea that the creature is simply too large to be seen all at once. That is the ocean's oldest trick on the human mind. The thing is so vast you only ever glimpse a part of it. From a god in a bay, we now rise to a serpent that ate the moon. Number 4. Bakunawa. When an eclipse darkened the sky over the pre-colonial Philippines, people did not stay silent. They grabbed pots, drums, and gongs, and they made as much noise as they possibly could. They were trying to frighten a sea dragon into spitting out the moon. That dragon is Bakunawa, whose name means the bent or curved snake, and it belongs to the Visayan, Bicolano, and other peoples of the islands. Bakunawa was the reason the moon vanished. According to the myth, it would rise out of the ocean and try to swallow the moon, and in some versions, the sun as well. The fuller story is even stranger. The supreme deity Bathala was said to have created 7 moons to light the night. Bakunawa, enchanted by their beauty, rose from the sea and devoured 6 of them, one after another, until only the single moon we see today remained. To protect that last moon, the islanders made their noise and their music whenever an eclipse began. The creature itself is a blend of serpent and dragon. It is described with a mouth the size of a lake, a red tongue, whiskers, gills, and a single pair of wings. It is bound up with the phases of the moon and with the movement of the tides. Spanish colonial writers in the 16th and 17th centuries recorded these eclipse customs, which is part of how we know how old the belief is. And Bakunawa is not alone in the world. Cultures everywhere invented a creature that eats the sun or moon. In Hindu tradition, it is Rahu. In Norse myth, the wolves Skal and Hati chased the sun and moon. Chinese legend blamed a celestial dragon. The human mind, watching the same frightening sky, kept reaching for the same answer. Underneath the myth, there is real ocean, too. Philippine waters teem with genuine sea snakes, many of them highly venomous, and the long, ribboning oarfish drifts there as well. Bakunawa survives today in Filipino tattoo art, in the serpent and naga motifs found on pre-colonial gold artifacts, and in modern comics, novels, and films that are reviving the old mythology. What stays with you is the accuracy hidden inside the fear. These islanders were tracking eclipses, real astronomical events, and folding them into a story about the sea reaching up to eat the sky. Our next creature blurs that same line between myth and observation, and this time, modern science proved the ancients right. Number 5. The Hafgufa. Sailors in the medieval North Atlantic told of a beast so enormous they mistook it for an island. They would see what looked like land, or a chain of rocks rising from the sea, and only realized too late that it was alive. This is the Hafgufa, a name that means sea steam, sea reek, or sea mist. Our best early description comes from a Norwegian book written around 1250 called the Konungs Skugsja, or the King's Mirror, written as a teaching dialogue between a father and son. It calls the Hafgufa the largest of all sea creatures. The text describes a very particular way of feeding. The Hafgufa would belch up food that attracted fish, wait for them to gather inside its open mouth, and then snap its jaws shut to trap them. The book even claims there are only ever 2 Hafgufas alive at once, and that they are sterile, a neat way of explaining why such giants were almost never seen. The creature is mentioned alongside the Lingbacher, a so-called heatherback whale also mistaken for an island. It appears again in the legendary Icelandic Urvar Odd saga, and most scholars agree it is an early ancestor of the later Kraken legend. Now here is where the story turns remarkable. In 2023, a researcher named Dr. John McCarthy at Flinders University with his colleagues published a study in the journal Deep Sea Research Part 1. They pointed out that the Hafgufa's feeding method, holding its mouth open at the surface to lure and trap fish, matches a real behavior called trap feeding. Trap feeding was only documented by marine biologists around 2011 in humpback and Bride's whales. The whale holds its jaws open at the surface, fish shelter inside thinking they are safe, and then the whale engulfs them. Medieval writers described this behavior centuries before science formally recorded it. In other words, the monster was real. Not an island-sized beast, but a careful, accurate observation of how living whales actually feed, wrapped in mythic language. The North Atlantic and Norwegian Sea are full of huge baleen whales, and the blue whale, the largest animal that has ever lived at up to 30 meters long, shows the kind of scale that could inspire such awe. The sea mist name may even describe a whale's misty spout. So if this monster encoded a true behavior we only just confirmed, it forces a question about all the others. What do people actually see? Our next creature has no such comfort. It is pure nightmare. Number 6. The Nuckelavee. Of all the creatures on this list, this one may be the most physically horrifying, and it comes from the Orkney Islands off the north coast of Scotland. The Nuckelavee is a sea demon, and its defining feature is that it has no skin. Imagine a creature whose raw muscles are fully exposed, whose black blood runs visibly through yellow veins, whose white sinews stretch and flex in the open air. It rides up out of the surf, and it is shaped like a horse fused together with a human rider, the two bodies joined into one nightmarish whole. We know the Nuckelavee mainly through Walter Trail Dennison, a native Orcadian who collected folklore in the 19th century. His key source was an old man named Thomas, who claimed he had met the creature himself, which gives us a rare first-person account. According to that telling, the horse body has fin-like legs and a single great eye that burns like a flame. Its mouth exhales a poisonous vapor. The human torso on its back has arms long enough to drag along the ground, and a head so large it rolls from side to side. Its breath was blamed for a livestock disease the Orcadians called mortoshin, and it was held responsible for crop failures, drought, and epidemics. But the legend gives terrified humans a way out. The Nuckelavee cannot cross fresh running water. If you could leap over a stream or a river, you were safe on the other side. In the lore, it is also confined during the summer months by a sea spirit called the Myther, or the Sea, who keeps it under control. There is even a strange economic detail. Orcadians used to burn seaweed to make soda ash, a real local industry, and the smoke from that burning was said to drive the Nuckelavee into a rage. The creature belongs to a wider family of malevolent water horses in Celtic and Norse folklore, alongside the Kelpie and the Ichu-Weej. But none of them are as grotesque as this. The Nuckelavee is really the sea itself made flesh, a way for a hard island community to give a face to disease, drought, and the cruelty of the ocean that surrounded them. It is fear given a flayed riding shape. Now we leave the cold north entirely and travel back to the very beginning of written civilization, to a monster whose body became the world. Number 7. Tiamat. Long before Greece, before the Bible, the people of ancient Mesopotamia imagined the Salt Sea as a goddess and as a monster. Her name is Tiamat, and she sits at the heart of the Babylonian creation epic known as the Enuma Elish, a story recorded across 7 clay tablets. Those tablets were rediscovered in the ruins of the great library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh, excavated in the mid-19th century by Austin Henry Laird and Hormuzd Rassam. When the scholar George Smith first translated portions of these texts in the 1870s, the Victorian public was stunned to find a creation story so old and so strange. In the myth, Tiamat is the primordial saltwater ocean, and her partner Apsu is the fresh groundwater beneath the earth. The mingling of their waters begins all creation. But when the younger gods grow noisy and troublesome, Apsu plots to destroy them and is killed first. Tiamat, enraged and grieving, rises up as a chaos dragon to take revenge. She spawns an army of monsters, serpent dragons, and scorpion men, and sets a new consort named Kingu to lead them. The young storm god Marduk steps forward as champion. He traps Tiamat in a great net, drives raging winds into her open mouth, and pierces her with an arrow. Then comes the part that makes Tiamat unlike any other creature on this list. Marduk splits her enormous body in two. From one half he forms the sky, and from the other he forms the earth. Her eyes become the sources of the two great rivers of Mesopotamia, the Tigris and the Euphrates. The world in this vision is literally built from the corpse of a sea monster. The name Tiamat is connected to the Akkadian word Tamtu, meaning the sea, and to the same root behind the Hebrew word Tehom, the deep. When the book of Genesis opens with the Spirit of God moving over the face of the deep, many scholars hear an echo of this far older sea of chaos. Tiamat is the original example of a pattern that repeats across the ancient Near East, the cosmic battle between an order-bringing god and a chaos serpent of the waters. Babylon reenacted her defeat every year at the Akkatu New Year festival. Today she lives on as a many-headed dragon goddess in fantasy games. She is both a creator mother and a monster, the ocean as the raw, chaotic material of everything. From the river mouths of Babylon, we now sail to the Greek coast and to a beast written into the night sky. Number 8, Cetus. Every time you hear the word cetacean, the scientific term for whales and dolphins, you are speaking the name of a Greek sea monster. That monster is Cetus. The Greek word ketos meant any huge sea creature, any sea monster or whale, and it became the root of our modern word for the whale family. Cetus is best known from the myth of Perseus and Andromeda. It begins with a boast. Queen Cassiopeia of the kingdom of Ethiopia claims that she, or her daughter Andromeda, is more beautiful than the Nereids, the sea nymphs. Poseidon, god of the sea, takes offense on their behalf and sends Cetus to ravage the coast. An oracle delivers a terrible verdict. The only way to stop the monster is to sacrifice the princess Andromeda. She is chained to a rock at the edge of the sea and left for the beast. But the hero Perseus arrives, fresh from killing the Gorgon Medusa. He sees Andromeda, fights Cetus, and slays it. In some versions, he uses his sword, and in others he lifts the severed head of Medusa and turns the monster to stone with her petrifying gaze. To honor the story, the monster was placed among the stars. The constellation Cetus is one of the largest in the entire sky, and it was listed by the astronomer Ptolemy in the 2nd century of our era. That patch of sky is even nicknamed the Sea, because it sits among other water-themed constellations like Pisces and Aquarius. Within Cetus lies the famous variable star Mira, whose changing brightness was noted by the astronomer David Fabricius in 1596. In Greek and Roman art, Cetus was usually drawn as a serpentine creature with a dog-like or dragon-like head and a coiling fishy body, an image that shaped sea dragons for centuries afterward. The poet Ovid retold the tale in his Metamorphoses, and modern films like Clash of the Titans borrowed the look, though they confusingly renamed the beast a kraken. What real animals stood behind Cetus? Whales, sharks, and stranded sea creatures were all known to the Greeks. The historian Adrienne Mayer has argued that fossil bones of huge prehistoric animals weathering out of Mediterranean cliffs fed the imagination of monstrous beasts. A vase from around 550 before the Common Era, known as the Monster of Troy vase, even shows a sea monster skull that some say resembles a real fossil skull. From a monster fixed forever in the stars, we move to one fixed forever to a single deadly stretch of water. Number 9, Scylla. There's a phrase still used today to be caught between Scylla and Charybdis, meaning trapped between two dangers with no safe path between them. It comes from Homer's Odyssey, composed around the 8th century before the Common Era, and Scylla is one of those two dangers. She guards one side of a narrow strait, while across from her churns the deadly whirlpool Charybdis. Odysseus has to sail between them, and he cannot avoid both. Homer's description of Scylla is the stuff of nightmares. She has 12 dangling feet and 6 long necks, and each neck ends in a head armed with 3 rows of teeth. She is said to bark like a young dog, and some ancient writers linked her name to Skylax, the Greek word for a puppy. As Odysseus steers his ship past her cliff, Scylla darts down and snatches 6 of his men, one for each of her hungry heads, and devours them as he watches helplessly. Later writers gave her a tragic backstory. In Ovid's Metamorphoses, Scylla was once a beautiful nymph. The sea god Glaucus fell in love with her, but the jealous sorceress Circe poisoned the water where Scylla bathed. Her lower body was transformed into a writhing girdle of snarling, snapping dogs. The beauty became the monster, a pattern Greek myth returns to again and again. The Strait of Scylla and Charybdis has long been identified with the Strait of Messina, the narrow channel between mainland Italy and the island of Sicily. And this is where the legend touches solid reality. The Strait of Messina genuinely has powerful swirling currents and whirlpools, a real hazard to ancient sailors rowing through in fragile wooden ships. The danger was real. The monster was the explanation. The same strait is also famous for a shimmering mirage called the Fata Morgana, which only added to its uncanny reputation. Some have suggested that the many writhing arms of a large octopus could have inspired Scylla's many limbs. Scylla appears all through ancient art, on vases and in carved reliefs, usually as a woman with a fishtail and dogs bursting from her waist. The proverb she gave us spread into language after language across Europe. What she really represents is a place, a specific choke point of water that swallowed ships and crews, given a monstrous, many-headed guardian so that the loss would make sense. Our final creature is the greatest of them all, the one that became a byword for everything the ocean hides. Number 10. The Leviathan. No sea monster casts a longer shadow than the Leviathan, the great beast of the Hebrew Bible. Its name Leviathan is usually connected to a root meaning to twist or to coil, which fits a vast serpentine creature. Leviathan appears in several books of the Bible, including Job, Psalms, and Isaiah, and each gives a different shade of the monster. The fullest portrait is in the book of Job, chapter 41, where God describes Leviathan as a creature beyond any human power to capture. Its scales are shut up tightly together as if sealed. Its mouth is ringed with fearsome teeth. Its eyes are like the rays of dawn, and smoke and fire pour from its body. In Psalm 104, the tone is gentler. There, Leviathan is simply a creature God made to play in the sea, a way of showing divine mastery over even the most terrifying thing in the water. But in Isaiah chapter 27, Leviathan becomes a fleeing, twisting serpent that God will one day punish with his sword, a symbol of cosmic evil to be defeated. That image did not come from nowhere. Texts discovered at a site called Ras Shamra in Syria, beginning in 1928, revealed an older Canaanite monster named Lotan, a 7-headed twisting serpent slain by the god Baal. Leviathan, Lotan, the Mesopotamian Tiamat, and the sea god Yam all belong to the same ancient family of chaos serpents of the sea. Later Jewish tradition paired Leviathan with a land monster called Behemoth, and told that in the age to come, the righteous would feast on Leviathan's flesh. One legend even says God created a male and a female Leviathan, then killed the female so that the two could not breed and overwhelm the world, an eerie echo of the sterile pair of Hafgufas far to the north. In Christian art, Leviathan became the gaping mouth of hell. The philosopher Thomas Hobbes borrowed the name in 1651 for his great book about the all-powerful state, and the ocean still produces real leviathans. In 2010, scientists named a giant fossil sperm whale Leviathan melvilli, honoring both the biblical monster and the author Herman Melville. It lived around 12 to 13 million years ago, had teeth up to 36 centimeters long, and hunted other whales. So the monster too vast to capture was not entirely fantasy. The sea really did once hold a beast worthy of the name. Which leaves us with a much larger question: why did every one of these distant cultures build a monster out of the sea? Look back across these 10 creatures and something becomes impossible to ignore. The Finns, the Vietnamese, the Ainu, the Filipinos, the Norse, the Orcadians, the Babylonians, the Greeks, and the ancient Hebrews never compared notes. They lived thousands of miles and thousands of years apart, yet every one of them placed a giant dangerous creature in the sea. That is not a coincidence. It is a window into how the human mind handles the unknown. For every coastal people, the ocean was the single largest mysterious thing in their world. It began right at the edge of the land and stretched to a horizon no one could cross and return from with certainty. The sea was the ultimate provider and the ultimate killer. It fed entire civilizations with fish, and it swallowed their suns in storms without leaving a trace. A force that powerful and that contradictory demands an explanation, and a monster is a very human kind of explanation. When the moon disappeared, Bakunawa was eating it. When livestock sickened, the Nuckelavee had breathed on them. When ships vanished in a strait, Scylla had taken the crew. The monster turned random, senseless loss into something with a cause, and a cause can at least be feared, appeased, or fought. There's also a deeper pattern that scholars call the Chaos Kampf, the battle against chaos. Again and again, an ordering god or hero confronts a serpent of the waters. Marduk fights Tiamat. Baal fights Lotan. God subdues Leviathan. Wainamoinen masters Iku-Turso. The sea stands for primal chaos, and the hero stands for order wrestling that chaos into a livable world. The recurring shape of these creatures matters too. So many of them coil. The serpent, the eel, the twisting body, appears from Finland to the Philippines, perhaps because real sea snakes and ribboning oarfish were there to be seen. Others take the form of the many-armed cephalopod, the octopus, and squid that genuinely haunt these waters. And notice how often a young woman is offered to the water. Andromeda is chained for Cetus. The maiden appears in the Bakunawa cycles. The sea is so hungry that only a human life seems enough to satisfy it. These are not childish stories. They are sophisticated tools for living beside something vast and lethal. The monster is the shape we give to the edge of the map. But that raises a practical question, one that science can actually help us answer. Behind these legends, what real animals were people seeing? Strip away the gods and the dragons, and a surprising amount of solid biology remains. Start with the serpents. The oarfish, scientific name Regalucus gleason, can grow past 8 meters, with a long silver ribbon of a body and a crest of red spines. A dying oarfish writhing at the surface is very likely the original sea serpent, and it could easily sit behind sightings tied to the Con Rit or Bakunawa. Then there are the tentacled gods. The giant Pacific octopus and the giant squid are real, genuinely large, and genuinely strange, more than enough to seed a story like Akkorokamui once fear and rumor get to work. The island beasts are the clearest case of all. The Hafgufa and the Lingbacher were whales. The blue whale reaches up to 30 meters, and a surfacing or floating whale, dark and barnacled, really can look like a low island or a reef. The 2023 research connecting the Hafgufa to whale trap feeding shows the link is not a guess. People watched whales feed and described exactly what they saw. Decomposition does the rest of the work. When a large animal washes ashore and rots, it can become an unidentifiable mass that beachgoers call a globster, with no clear head, tail, or species. That same decay explains the segmented bodies in serpent reports. The muscle blocks of a large fish or whale, called myomeres, separate as the flesh breaks down, producing what looks like armor plating or a string of joints. A rotting basking shark is a notorious offender because as its gills and jaw fall away, the remaining cartilage can resemble a long-necked monster. The deep sea also genuinely favors giants. The cold, the pressure, and the slow metabolism of the abyss produce oversized creatures like the giant isopod and the colossal squid, a phenomenon called deep-sea gigantism. And we should not forget fossils. The historian Adrian Mayer has argued convincingly that ancient peoples dug up the bones of huge extinct animals and reconstructed monsters from them long before the science of paleontology existed. The discovery of Leviathan melvilli, a real 13-million-year-old sperm whale that hunted other whales, proves the ocean once held beasts every bit as fearsome as the myths. So the legends were not simply invented out of nothing. They were built from real glimpses, real carcasses, and real bones, interpreted by people doing their honest best. And in a few astonishing cases, those people were ahead of the scientists. It is tempting to treat all of this as charming superstition. the quaint imaginings of people who did not know better. That would be a mistake. In several cases, the folklore turned out to contain accurate observations that modern science only caught up with much later. The Hafgufa is the headline example. Medieval Norse and bestiary writers described a sea creature that held its mouth open at the surface to trap fish. Marine biologists did not formally document this trap-feeding behavior in humpback and bride's whales until around 2011, and the connection to the old text was only published in 2023. The monster was a field note in disguise. Akkorokamui carries a similar truth. The Ainu said it could shed and regrow its limbs. Real octopuses do exactly that, dropping an arm to escape a predator and regenerating it over time. The detail was correct centuries before any laboratory-studied cephalopod regeneration. Bakunawa encodes something even more impressive. To build a story around the moon being swallowed and then released, a culture has to be carefully watching eclipses, tracking when the moon and sun darken and return. That is real, repeated astronomical observation, dressed in the language of a dragon. The broader lesson is that the ocean genuinely keeps hiding giants, and extinct is not always the final word. The most famous proof is the Kelakonth, a fish believed lost for 65 million years until a living one was hauled up off South Africa in the 20th century. Scientists call creatures like that Lazarus taxa, species that vanish from the record and then reappear. The discovery of the fossil Leviathan reminds us that the deep past held predators we are still only beginning to understand. Oral tradition, it turns out, can act as a kind of memory bank, preserving real events and real animals in story form for many generations. None of this means every monster was real. Iku-Turso is not waiting in the Baltic. The Nuckelavee never breathed disease across Orkney. Tiamat's body did not become the sky. The responsible approach is to hold two ideas at once, to stay skeptical of the supernatural while taking seriously the observations buried inside the myth. The people who told these stories were not fools. They were watching the sea with great attention, and sometimes they saw things we are only now confirming, which leads to the most exciting part. We are still finding new monsters right now. Here's a fact that should reset how you think about all of this. We have better maps of the surface of Mars and the Moon than we do of our own ocean floor. The deep sea remains the least explored place on the planet, and new species are pulled from it constantly. Marine biologists describe new fish, new octopuses, and new gelatinous creatures every single year, many of them so bizarre they would not look out of place in an ancient legend. The age of sea monsters is not over. It has simply moved from the realm of folklore into the realm of remote cameras and deep submersibles. Consider the giant squid, the genus Architeuthis. For centuries it was dismissed as a sailor's tall tale, the supposed origin of the kraken. Then dead specimens proved it was real, and finally, in the early 21st century, scientists managed to film a living giant squid in its natural habitat, first in 2004 and then on video in 2012. A creature that had been called a myth for hundreds of years turned out to be entirely real, swimming in the dark exactly as the story said. Every time a remotely operated vehicle descends into a trench, it returns with footage of animals no human had ever seen alive. New tools are extending our reach in ways the old sailors could never have dreamed of. Environmental DNA, called eDNA, lets researchers detect a creature simply from the genetic traces it leaves in the water, without ever seeing the animal itself. Advanced sonar maps the shape of things moving in the deep. Deep-diving submersibles carry human eyes to crushing depths. In a sense, this technology is the modern version of the watchful sailor leaning over the rail. Except now the watcher can record what it sees and bring the proof home. So could a genuinely large unknown animal still be down there? An honest scientist would say it is unlikely that a 100-meter octopus or a true sea dragon is hiding from us. Animals that big need enormous amounts of food and tend to leave evidence. But something modest, something the size of a new whale or a new shark, that is far from impossible in an ocean we have barely touched. The line between monster and undiscovered species has always been thinner than we like to admit. And that is exactly why these 10 ancient creatures still hold us. We began in the frozen Baltic with a horned god, and we have traveled to a Vietnamese beach, a Japanese bay, a Philippine night sky, a Norse voyage, an Orkney shore, a Babylonian creation, a Greek coast, a deadly Italian strait, and the pages of the oldest scriptures. 10 creatures, 10 cultures, 1 ocean. What ties them together is not that any single monster was literally real. It is that the sea has always been humanity's oldest mirror, the surface onto which we project our deepest fear and our deepest wonder. When people did not understand the water, they filled it with the shape of their imagination. And that shape was almost always a monster. These stories endure because the feeling behind them never went away. Stand on any shore at night and look out at the black water, and you feel the same thing the ancient Orcadian felt, the same thing the Ainu fisherman felt. The sea is enormous, it is dark, and it does not answer questions. It gives and it takes without explanation. A monster is the most human possible response to something that vast and that indifferent. It turns an unbearable mystery into a story we can tell each other around a fire and survive. The honest path forward is to hold the skepticism and the wonder together. We can know that Tiamat did not become the sky, and still feel the pull of a world imagined from the corpse of a sea dragon. We can know that the Hafgufa was a feeding whale, and find that more astonishing than the myth, because it means people were paying real attention to the deep long before they had the words for what they saw. The monsters were never just lies. They were the first attempts at marine biology, told in the only language available, and the deep has not finished surprising us. Most of it is still unmapped, still unwatched, still dark. Every year it gives up another creature we did not know existed, and every one of them reminds us that the ancient storytellers were not wrong to be amazed. The sea is the place where the map has always run out, where knowledge ends and imagination begins. The 10 creatures on this list have outlived the empires that created them. They are still here because the question that made them is still here, asked every time the water goes dark and we wonder, quietly, what might be looking back. The ocean remembers, and it is still keeping secrets.